Bask in my glory and despair, mortals, for I am Malacrag Foeburner. Welcome, hatchlings. I see that you have returned. That is good. It requires courage to accept the knowledge that I have to offer. And why am I here, do you ask? I am here to make Dungeon Masters better. And what is a Dungeon Master? Why, it's me, of course. What? No, you're just the boss monster I voice. I'm the Dungeon Master. How dare you? It was indeed you who conceived of me, and take tribute for me on this channel. But remember your place. But I created you. How... what are we? It is I, Malacrag, who will see this through. A Dungeon Master is a literary creator of words. This channel is here to forge Dungeon Masters worthy of the table. Dungeon Masters who don't just want to tell the story that is wrote in all of those canonized books, but something truly of their own for a long campaign. There are Dungeon Masters who will wish to do simply one-shot campaigns, but that should only be minuscule in comparison to the large project of the campaign. My wisdom can benefit all those who dare to don the great mustache of storytelling. So my question to you is, why are you here? Why does anyone want to be a storyteller at all? The secret is that all great storytellers don't want to be a storyteller. They don't see the end of the story from the beginning. We all start as hatchlings. What you need to know now is what you are in for. You, the storyteller, the master of dungeons, are the world. You are everything that a player might interact with through their characters. You must always assume that your players don't know anything other than what you tell them. So therefore you must provide explicit details in every situation. That way the more that you give them, the more that they have to interact with. Your players expect crunchy dialogue, memorable characters in the world, and most of all, they have to not be able to see that most of it was invented on the spot. And remember, you are in the story with them. However, you are not a member of their party. You are everything else. The way they understand the world is through you. You are just as responsible for their actions and the consequences as they are. But here is the meat of it. How do you prepare for a game session? First, get your head in the game. You need to learn how to immerse yourself first, because if you're not there, the players aren't there. Like I'm doing now with this voice and getting into the mode to be able to be a dungeon master. You must also listen to music and do things that bring out that actor inside of you. Being a dungeon master is about 50-50 preparation and ad-lib. Your players' characters are going to be chaotic for the most part. However, there is much that you can prepare for, many things that you can see that they do not. And so, you must visualize the environment. See what they do not, and describe it ahead. Always perceive before they do. Write out as much as possible. If they are entering a magic shop, per se, then you need to be able to have everything present, all of the descriptions. The shelves, the items on the shelves, the shopkeepers, the carpets on the floor, the windows, what doors enter and exit. You need to have all of these things, and preparing that requires you to draw it out, to create the little mini maps of those little areas, and you can place as much detail as you want in those places. And remember that these details require time, not just your time, but their time if they are going to interact with the place. So a magic shop may be something that everyone is interested in, and you need to be able to predict that your players would want to spend a great deal of time in this one place, or it could be small, and the amount of effort that you put into it would feel a little less appreciated. You don't have to anticipate everything that your players will do. And you don't need to anticipate everything that they do. Just have a good head on your shoulders about the concepts of choice and consequences. Now, you don't have to anticipate everything that the players are going to do, but you need a good head on your shoulders when it comes to choices and consequences, and what can happen during some of these things. Say, your shopkeeper might need a stat block, like any monster, and even maybe a few interesting abilities, because it might be the case that your players may cross the shopkeeper, try to steal something, or perhaps make them very, very angry, say the wrong thing, and there could be a fight. So now that you have that part actually designed in your head, write it out a little, and make sure to get that stat block in there, as well as perhaps think about the thickness of the walls, if anyone would overhear fighting inside. Now it is time to actually fill the shop with items, which means that there will be about 50-50 useful items to other miscellaneous things that they may or may not need or be interested in. Be sure to keep the items somewhat relevant to their characters, because things like a party of fire mages may not be as interested in the magical torches. Remember that you are not the only mind at the table. You need to get their input, the things that they might expect. And you get that before session, you get that talking outside of the game. And it can create some good interpersonal contact with people that you otherwise don't have much to talk about with. The next step is, well, designing pretty much the things that you would expect. The dungeon, the towns, the areas around it. This is something that you need to do and create maps with. And even if your players don't see all of the map at a time, sometimes you can have one map and then you have them draw their own map. That can be rather intriguing, because what they expect may not be reality. If you're using an online virtual tabletop, I recommend to use that with all of its features, because that is just rather fun. To have something that they interact with that shows light cones when they move around the corners and such. That is actually takes a little bit of the theater of the mind out of the dungeon mastering process, but it does give your players' characters something more to interact with. Now when it comes to making choices, remember that, yes, still, you are not the only mind at the table, and the other players will actually sometimes give you ideas, just even muttering under their breath. And it can be rather fun to just interact as a group and think about choices and consequences, especially when somebody goes and does something off the rails. Now for building the map of the world. You don't actually need to show the entire world, because not everyone in this setting is going to have a full knowledge of the geography of the world. They're going to pretty much know what their local area has, and you can help them by pointing out details and helping them when they're drawing their own map. But remember, you should also have your map, because you know what is there. You don't know what the characters think. And it's good to always have a copy of that. So having a nice copy machine when you have a live table, a table in real life, is a lifesaver. If not, I recommend that if you're using Discord voice chat, that there are apps that allow you to interact as a team. The other part is, what happens when we want to leave the town? That is a question that your players are going to have, and you need to think about the journey and how the roads are shaped and what that all entails. So having that world map is priceless. So you can actually create it as you go in the region. The most important step after creating this local map is to think about journeying between places and how far these distances are. Sometimes the journey in itself can be very fun. There could be wolves in the woods, there could be pretty much anything that people might find scary about traveling. Now, creating a dungeon map is something that does take a significant amount of time. And by significant, I mean, it isn't a thing that you want to write about an hour before game. It is something that you want to do the day before, and to make sure that it has enough details, and before game session, about an hour before, go over all of those details yourself on your own. And once you've done that, then you have it fresh in your mind for when the game is in session. Now, even when it's not the dungeon, even when we're talking about the town, that needs to have a map as well. And not only just little dots with names on them for where these places are, but you should actually draw out maps of the buildings, little floor plans that show what is inside of this tavern, where the tables are, and all of this. It's very easy to do with a virtual tabletop, but otherwise it's a lot of little 8.5 by 11 maps of rooms, and that can be rather difficult if you don't have a grid. But remember that not every place needs to have that, level of tokens and size and how far things are apart in the physical world. You can do a lot of this in the theater of the mind. But do remember that taverns are quite frequently a place of combat as well, because you will always have drunkards who want to fight, or your own party members who wish to annoy the locals and such like that. Also, taverns are a place that guards are most often to come find you. Now, remember that the players are not in your head, so that when you're describing things, be sure to give the details that they need in order to interact with, and feed those first if you want to help shape what the decisions are going to look like. Give them plenty of vagueness for options, but don't be too vague. Don't limit their choices by simply keeping things so open, as in, this door is red. You need to describe the handle on the door, whether it has a knocker, whether there's a window in it, whether there's a little pinhole for someone to peep through. And all of that can be gathered with rolling dice for perception, which is a very important skill for many of the players to have. And some may choose not to specialize in it at all, and that can also be rather fun. So remember to look at your character's stats and abilities when preparing your dungeons and your towns and such. Now, progress in D&D is marked by levels, and in many tabletop games it's the same. But what I recommend is also thinking about what things that people would encounter at those levels. And the Dungeon Master Guide does have some rather simplistic ways of explaining this with certain tiers of items or interactions, and they also have many things that are more complicated, like something called the Bastion system, which at kind of the early-ish levels gives you the opportunity to provide a space for the adventurers to come back to, a home, if you will. Because sometimes we don't always want to be camping on the roadside, and these places require progress and growth, just as people do, just as your players' characters do. And to give them this place to come home to also gives them a place that they can interact with their characters and develop and grow in their bonds outside of combat. The actual most harrowing thing for a dungeon master to do is to provide a place for the characters to grow, is to give them this access and this path, this journey to completing their adventure. So there needs to be steps throughout it. And that means that at the very beginning, we need to be using superlatives on the lower end. And we need to be using things like maybe hand carts and horse-drawn carts as the means of travel. They shouldn't be immediately jumping onto a dragon and flying across the world. That's good to maybe start a campaign with just one of those things, but then drop them off in a way that lets them know that it will be a long time before they're able to see something of this grandeur again. And keep those moments important. Keep them memorable. Describe them very well. And remember to always hone your writing. And when I say using lower level superlatives, remember big, bigger, biggest. Remember that as things grow, then our words for them grow as well. So, not every fireball is going to be a nuclear detonation, but at far later levels, it's going to look like that. And you need to describe it that way. Give people good bang for the buck. And now that you have all of this in your head, it's time to write it down. And the best way to do so is to first start with the timeline of the session. Yes, that is from the beginning of it until the end. And when I say that timeline, I mean you are marking how much time passes throughout this. So, as the adventure continues, don't give people more than maybe 5 minutes of their own interaction time with the environment without moving to someone else as well. Try to keep things moving, keep it fresh, and that way you can keep your content original and allow for your players to be able to have a chance equally And some of the things are going to be like social interactions where maybe one character is a little more well-suited to discussing with the guards. But that doesn't necessarily mean that all of everyone else is silent in this. You can move around and ask, what are you doing right now? And kind of lay out their environment around them. Because there's people going to be, you know, twiddling their thumbs literally in the party, just standing there on the side. But it's also important to give them the opportunity to interact with their environment as well. Because that guard isn't only talking to one person, and that guard might not only have information that's important to one person. So sometimes multiple people can be asking these questions. But remember to use the social roles to help the situation rather than to actively hinder. Because as a dungeon master, even though you are the one who places roadblocks in their ways in the dungeon, outside of the dungeon, give them a little more leeway. Give them the opportunity to remember that the outside world, outside of this heinous experience, is more realistic. It's still fantastical, but it's not quite as much. Now, with this timeline that I stated before, remember to set out in equivalent parts how much of the session you want to be doing each thing. So, if you are in the dungeon, if all of your players are interacting and in the same place, then remember that the amount of time should be divided evenly as well. Maybe some people are in town, mucking about and doing things. It's not good to have the party fully split, especially in something as dangerous as a dungeon. But not everybody is going to be in the same place at the same time all the time. Namely, if you have somebody who is the class rogue. Whoever is the one who is being the infiltrator and moving ahead and mapping things and interacting and making sure that it's safe for the rest of the party. That is a rather dangerous job, and reward it accordingly. But also in that, remember to return back to the rest of the group and to split things, as I had said before, evenly. The rest of the way that I personally will spread out an adventure is that I will bullet point it. Just as I create notes for my content here, if you take and you place certain things that they can interact with, story points that they can learn, and then leave the sections after it blank for your own notes, and write in things that might be interesting lore, and then that way when the session is over, you have yet one other job to do, which is the wrap-up. Now, we'll get into the wrap-up in the next episode. So this has been rather entertaining and is a delightful distraction from pillaging. Do not forget to like this video and subscribe for more notifications. That will help us greatly. Also, I have a Patreon that is in the description, and if you would like, please donate. That will help me out very much in my life and in these projects. Now that is it for today. Ah yes, where am I in my script? Oh yes. Bask in my glory and despair, mortals, for I am the mighty Malacrag, the sanguine burning god, master of the skies, the prominence of darkness, and the connoisseur of the rarest of charcuteries. Until next time, toodles.